So we're going to do an origami-based grid drawing. So the idea of this comes from, us dealing with the pandemic and how do I allow my students to experience grid drawing if they don't have rulers or something like that, a simple tool to kind of use. And with my 30 years of origami background, I kind of thought of a way that we can make this work. So the theme that I'm going to be using today is endangered species. And what I'm going to have my students do is find an image of an endangered species and print it out full size. It doesn't have to be color, but you want the image to be of the animal or the face of the animal. It needs to be clear, so when you look up close you can see individual hairs. If it's blurry or pixelated, you just can't use it. The background doesn't really matter. We're not going to deal with the background for this particular project. And if you'd rather do a portrait or something like that, if you're watching this from another class, that's fine. But for my students, we're going to focus on endangered species. And you'll need to note what the endangered species is. So this is a fennec fox. It's endangered. It's from the Sinai Peninsula of the Sahara Desert. So I picked it because, well, he's cute. And I thought this would make a good subject for what it is we're going to be doing with a grid drawing. So the first thing you're going to need is, of course, the image. Now, it could come out of a magazine, but it needs to be almost a full sheet of copy paper. If it's too much smaller than that, it's not really going to work for our needs. Then what you're going to do is very, very carefully, you're going to cut out the image so you have a rectangle or square, whatever format the image is. We're going to assume it is square base, like a rectangle or a square. And this is going to help us figure out the proportions of our grid. Now, in most classical gridding projects, we use squares and go from square to square and just duplicate it like Chuck Close did, or like Leonardo da Vinci would have done way back when. So this is going to be a little bit different, because I'm going to assume that my students don't have rulers. So go ahead and I've cut out my image. And then I need my drawing paper, which must be larger. For our sake, we're going to be doubling the size of this image onto our drawing paper. You could do it the same size if you only have copy paper available. You can use this same technique. Just make sure the size of the image is the size of the paper you're going to draw on. But if you want to double the image like we're going to do, we need double the size. So I'm going to take this paper and I'm going to do a little simple origami and fold it in half twice. So once in this direction, and I'm going to line up very carefully on the edge. If you can line up a corner and the edge looks good, then you can hold down that corner and then press down the rest. Then I'm going to turn it in the other direction and fold it again. This time I'm going to take the corner that's already got a fold on it, line it up with the other one, hold that corner, and then I can press down the paper behind it. Now what I'm going to do is take my image, and I've got to find the inside corner. So this is my inside corner, because this will become the center of my paper. So that's the inside corner. I need to know where that is. So if you need to mark it so you don't forget, that's fine. So I'm going to line that up with the inside corner, line up my drawing, and then very lightly, I'm going to draw down the lines that are the edge of my image. Okay. And now it's very, very light. The camera might not even be able to see it, but I can. And I'm going to go ahead and cut that out. Now, a little tip for cutting is you always use the inside edge of the scissor as opposed to the tip of the scissors. So the inside edge is right in here. That's where it's most accurate and powerful. The tips are not really helpful unless something is very, very thin. Okay, and then I can go ahead and recycle that. I'm going to keep this little edge to the side because I've got my information about my animal. And now I have an image and a paper that is exactly twice as large. All right, so now we're going to get to the origami part. So I'm going to set that aside, and I'm going to take my image and I'm going to fold it in half. Go ahead, like I did before, find one corner, see if I can line up that edge, and then just press down the paper behind it. Now I open that up, and I want to fold each edge to the center. And so I've got a center fold, and I'm folding into that. Now, if the image makes it really hard to see your lines, then you could certainly work on it on the back, and you could see they kind of pop out a little bit better. So that's fine too. So now I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 sections. What we want to get to is 8, all right? So I'm going to go back, move these to the center. This is where we left off, okay? And now I'm going to take these sides and move them to the center as well. So I call this barn doors. You're doing the barn doors in, and then you're going to do them in one more time. And the more perfect you do your barn doors, the more perfect your image will be in the end. Now, the nice thing about gridding an animal is that if it's off just a little bit, it still looks like an animal. However, if you're doing a portrait, if it's off, it starts to not look like that person. And we should have 8. So as I count across, maybe I'll do it on the back so you can see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, now I need to do it in the other direction. Okay, so I'm going to go now from bottom to top, fold it in half, I match a corner, and then the edge, press it down. Okay, now I'm going to fold it to the center again. Look both ways, make sure it's lined up nicely. Fold it down. And then I'm going to fold those barn doors one more time. All right, when I open this up, you can see I have a grid. It's easier to see from the back, and it's a rectangular grid, which is fine. Okay. Now, if you have a hard time seeing it on top of your image, there's another trick you can do is to reverse the lines. And you can use a pencil or a pen and go right inside that line. If you leave it folded, the pen will kind of follow that edge. Now you don't have to do this. If your lines stand out really well, then that's fine. But you can grid it up. And I'm going to go ahead and do that and then speed up my video. And now you can see I have a grid on my fennec fox, and I didn't need to use a ruler. Right, so now we have to do, if we're going to grid, whatever grid we have here, we need to make here. So we've already got our first lines, so there's less work to do. So again, we're going to think of this as the center, and then we're going to do our barn doors to close it up. Now, I can see that my edge cut wasn't perfect, so I'm going to line up my middle one, and then that'll make it okay. Because if the edges are a little off, that's not going to be a big deal. Okay, but I want to make sure that center is lined up. Okay. And that just means that when I cut this, I wasn't absolutely perfect like a machine. But like I said, these grids are forgiving for this kind of work. Okay. Now I'm going to take it and fold it in half again. This time, again, paying attention to the center. That's the most important part. Open that up. Now I've already got my center line. I'm just going to crease it to make it stand out. I'm going to bring the sides to the center. And then one more time to close up those barn doors. So now I have my first grid and my transfer grid. So as I work on this, we're going to go one square at a time or one rectangle at a time. And I'm going to transfer over the design and I'm going to ignore the background. So as I'm working, you'll want to kind of pay attention to where lines enter and exit on your piece. So for this one, I've got nothing here. So this row is essentially done. This next row, I've got 1, 2, 3, fourth one down. 1, 2, 3, fourth one down. I see a little hair entering here, and that's about halfway down that side. So here's about halfway down that side. And then the hair exits about, if that's half, that's a quarter, and that's about an eighth. So half, quarter, eighth. I make a little dot. And then I go ahead and draw kind of the chunks of hair. I'm not trying to draw individual hairs. I'm kind of drawing the chunks that I see. And if you need to draw right on your picture to kind of catch those, that's fine. It can kind of simplify things. So as I look, I've got 1, 2, this one pops out a little bit more, and then a small one, and then it ends there. So that's that square. The next square, we know where it starts, and it's going to end about here. So if that's halfway, it's a little bit to the left of halfway. Here's left, halfway, a little bit left. So I know that the nose is kind of hitting there, and I know the hair here needs to come down. So I am going to go ahead and trace the main chunks of hair that I see. And I've got a line going up to the eye. It's okay to kind of catch that. And then I'm going around and doing the nose with the mouth and catching that. So I'm going to catch this line going down here. 1, 2, and then the nose back this way. Kind of comes over and it's ending about an eighth. Catch that here. Down. All right. This is going up to about halfway. Then I finish the fur. Okay. Now I'm going to the next square. So this is what you're going to do through the process. You're going to go square by square and transfer what you see. And it's okay to draw lines on your picture to kind of make things stand out. So I'm going to continue with one more here, and then we're going to be changing my view. So his chin is hitting about there. So the chin would be about here. And let's see, it's exiting here. So we've got this coming over a little bit, and then down, under to the nose. Over here to the mouth. And then the chin is coming over and catching this little bump. And then we're going to go ahead and finish up the nose. The nose hole goes right there. Another one right about there. And then there's this little part. Okay. Later on, I'll be able to make some adjustments and kind of fix things. But this is how I'm starting, row by row, until I finish my fennec fox. The background, we're going to use a pattern, and we're going to find a pattern that either tells us a little bit about the animal, maybe his environment. So we can look up the plants that are in the Sinai Peninsula desert, and we can do a pattern of those in the background. Or maybe something that would help that animal survive. Maybe we can come up with a symbol for conservation, or something that would help protect the animal, or a pattern of something, what is hurting their population, to research and find out what it is that is diminishing the population of the fennec fox, and then we can have a pattern of the threat in the background. So the pattern needs to have some sort of connection to the endangered species. Okay, so it can be the environment, what's hurting it, or what can help it. So we'll need to think symbolically about that. But we're going to first worry about drawing the animal, and then we're going to kind of brainstorm ideas about what is going to be in our pattern. Okay, I'm going to continue this with a fast forward of my drawing process. So this is the finished drawing portion of my fennec fox, and I can go in and use color pencils, I could use pastels, pretty much anything I'd like. I need to make sure that I go back and get rid of any of that original pencil, so that's going to be some erasing. If you're not sure, the background design, I looked up the fennec fox and I found out that they eat grasshoppers and rodents in the Sinai Peninsula. So I could have used a grasshopper or a rodent as kind of a background. I looked up why they were endangered, and the reason is for hunting them for their fur. There's some pressure on their ecosystems because of global warming. I could have used a sun to kind of represent that as a pattern. The other thing was that the communities are growing in that area, so they're being pushed out. So I could have like a city skyline perhaps to represent the threat. But the other thing that I didn't expect is that fennec foxes are popular as a pet because they're so small and they're not generally a threat to human beings. They're often trapped and sold illegally as pets. So what I did here is a dog bowl with a nose sign going through it, and maybe I'll color that in red or something. So that's actually what my symbol means, is this idea of a pet bowl, but you really shouldn't be using these animals as pets. So that's the threat that's going on in here. So when you find your endangered animal, print it out and go through this process, you'll get to this point, and then you need to decide how it is you want to color it in and stuff like that. So I do have a video. I'll put a link that shows you my expectations for coloring to make sure it looks as good as it possibly can, and that you get the highest credit you can. But like I said, there's a variety of materials that we could use for this particular one for our endangered species grid project. If you have a hard time picking an animal, if you want to add another layer of depth to your work, you could actually research your own culture. Like for me, my heritage is Irish, Swedish, and a little bit British Honduras from my grandparents. So I could look up animals that are endangered in Ireland or Sweden or the Honduras area. And that way, when you're writing up your explanation about your animal, if you can put a personal connection in there, that helps raise a portion of your grade. So for me, I chose the fennec fox and the Sinai Peninsula because I taught for 2 years in that area. So I could have seen them and didn't even know it at the time. And that was one of my favorite experiences as a teacher, was teaching in Egypt near the Sinai Peninsula. So that was my personal connection to this particular animal and why I chose this. So always consider your choice, and is there a way you can make a connection? So in our rubric, when we go over that, if you have a personal connection, it helps raise that grade a little bit. And if you don't, if you just say, well, I picked it because it's cute, that's fine. you're meeting expectations because you picked an animal. But if you want to exceed expectations, you can have a personal connection to it. Maybe there's an animal that your family actually likes to provide money for to help save a particular endangered species. That would be a personal connection. A cultural connection is another one. So think about that as you're making your artistic choices.